Welcome to tonight's sleep story. Let's drift into a soothing story together as you begin your journey into a restful and rejuvenating sleep. The cold winter morning wrapped the little town in a blanket of soft, persistent snow. The world outside was still, no sound but the occasional rustle of snowflakes dancing in the breeze. Inside the small cottage at the edge of the village, a girl sat by the window, staring out at the bleak landscape. Her name was Elara, and her life had always been simple, perhaps too simple. The creaking of the wooden floor beneath her feet and the thin, warm blanket draped across her shoulders were familiar sounds that echoed her everyday existence. She had known nothing but hardship, the constant struggle to gather enough firewood, to find enough food, and to stay warm during the long, biting winters. Her parents had passed when she was young, and since then she had relied on her own two hands to survive. Elara didn't mind the solitude, though. She had learned early on that sometimes the quiet was a comfort. It was a life that lacked the luxuries others enjoyed, but it was a life she had grown accustomed to. Today, however, something felt different. There was a strange energy in the air, a subtle shift that made her sit up straighter, her gaze still fixed on the snow outside. The day felt like it was full of promise, even though she couldn't explain why. Perhaps it was just the way the sun glinted off the snow, or the soft whisper of the wind as it danced between the trees. Or maybe it was the growing feeling inside her, a feeling that something was about to change. She pushed herself up from the small table by the window, pulling on her thick woolen cloak. It was time to venture out. The village wasn't far, and she needed to gather supplies, wood, food, anything that might see her through another long, cold week. As she stepped out the door, the chill hit her immediately, but she didn't mind. The cold was familiar, a constant companion. She walked slowly, her breath clouding in front of her as she trudged through the thick snow, her boots sinking into the soft layers with every step. She had been walking for what felt like hours, her legs aching from the long trek, when something unexpected caught her eye. Just ahead, partially buried beneath the snow, a glimmer of something caught the light. It was strange, shimmering in the otherwise blank landscape. Elara paused and stepped toward it, her curiosity piqued. As she knelt to investigate, she uncovered what appeared to be a pair of shoes. Odd, for the ground was usually barren this time of year. But these shoes were no ordinary ones. They were crafted from what seemed to be the finest leather, decorated with intricate stitching, and though the snow had covered them in a thin layer of frost, there was a warmth to them, an unusual presence that felt almost magical. Elara picked them up, feeling their weight in her hands. They were surprisingly light, yet sturdy, like they could withstand anything the harsh winters could throw at them. As she turned the shoes over in her hands, she felt something stir within her. A strange hope, a sense of possibility she hadn't known in years. These shoes, found amidst the frozen wilderness, felt like a sign, as if they were meant for her. She hesitated for a moment, a small voice in her head whispering doubts. Should she take them? What if they were someone else's? But another part of her, a deeper part, urged her on. Take them, the voice inside her whispered. What harm could they do? With that, she slipped off her worn shoes and carefully placed her feet into the new ones. The moment her toes touched the soft leather, she felt a warmth spread through her entire body. It was like stepping into a world of comfort, where the chill of the outside world could no longer touch her. The shoes felt alive, as if they had been waiting for her to find them. A gentle pulse of energy moved through her, and a soft smile crept onto her lips. Elara stood up, testing the shoes on her feet. They fit perfectly, as though they had been made just for her. She felt lighter, not just in her step, but in her heart, as if a weight had been lifted that she hadn't even realized was there. The air around her seemed to shimmer, and for the first time in a long while, Elara felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. Hope? Maybe, just an maybe, her life was about to change. Maybe these shoes were the first step towards something better. And with that thought, she took her first step, feeling a strange but wonderful energy surge through her. The warmth from the shoes enveloped Elara as she stood there, stunned for a moment, unable to comprehend the sudden shift in her world. It wasn't just that the shoes fit perfectly, it was the feeling they invoked. She felt stronger, as if the shoes were not merely accessories, but an extension of herself. There was an unspoken connection between her and the shoes, something that ran deeper than mere comfort. It was as if they had been waiting for her, meant for her all along. The crisp winter air no longer seemed as biting as it had moments before. As she took her first step, the snow beneath her boots felt softer, less resistant. The walk back to the village, which would normally have been a grueling task, now seemed effortless. She moved with a grace she hadn't felt in years. Her feet, light and swift, carried her through the snow as though they were floating above it. As Elara walked, she couldn't help but notice the subtle changes around her. The world seemed brighter, more vibrant. The trees, once bare and desolate under the weight of winter, now looked alive with the faintest glimmer of green at the tips of their branches. The air itself felt richer, the wind no longer cold but invigorating, carrying with it the scent of pine and distant fires. The ground beneath her feet, which had once been a challenge, was now a smooth path. Each step was sure, each breath filled with ease. She found herself smiling, a sensation she hadn't felt in months. There was something magical about the shoes, something beyond their appearance or their fit. It wasn't just that they were new or that they were helping her walk more easily. It was the way they seemed to open up a world of possibilities before her, like a door to something she had long wished for, but could never quite touch. As she neared the village, the familiar houses and market square came into view. The sounds of life, the chatter of vendors, the clinking of carts, the occasional laugh of children, began to grow louder, pulling Elara back to reality. But even in this busy scene, Elara felt a sense of peace. The shoes seemed to carry her effortlessly, as though the bustling life of the village no longer held the same weight for her. It was as if she had crossed into a different world, one where she was no longer defined by her struggles or by her circumstances. She reached the market square where people milled about, trading goods, exchanging pleasantries, and going about their business. Elara stopped at the edge of the square, noticing the warm firelight spilling from the tavern doors. For a brief moment she wondered what it would be like to be a part of that life, to step beyond the confines of her humble existence. Her mind flickered to the shoes she was wearing. Could they really change her life? Could something as simple as a pair of shoes open doors she had never dreamed of? It felt impossible. Yet, as she looked down at them, shiny and perfect, unlike any shoes she had ever seen, the reality of the situation felt too clear to ignore. Without thinking, Elara walked toward the market, her feet light and buoyant in the shoes. She passed by the vendors and stall owners who had once barely noticed her. Today, they looked up, their eyes widening at the sight of her new, confident stride. They whispered to one another, no longer overlooking her, but noticing her in a way they never had before. "Good day, Elara," a merchant called out, her voice full of surprise. Elara nodded politely but didn't stop to engage. She could feel the shift in the way people looked at her, and it both exhilarated and unnerved her. It was as if the shoes had not only transformed the way she walked, but also the way the world perceived her. The magic they seemed to carry was not just about comfort or ease. It was about the power of perception, the subtle change in the air when someone realized they were not the same person they had once been. Elara wandered through the market, her eyes catching on various goods she hadn't thought to buy before. She stopped at the bread stall, where the baker greeted her with a smile. "Fresh bread for a fine lady like yourself?" he asked, his eyes twinkling with recognition. Elara hesitated for a moment. The shoes had not only changed the way she felt, but they had changed the way others treated her. For the first time in her life, she felt seen, truly seen. Not for her poverty, but for who she was becoming. The sense of belonging, of being part of the world in a way she had never been before, was intoxicating. "I'll take 2 loaves, thank you," Elara replied, her voice clear and confident, surprising even herself. "So need-free." As she continued to walk through the market, her new shoes carried her with ease and grace. People who had once overlooked her now smiled at her presence, their eyes full of admiration. The shoes, it seemed, had not only granted her physical comfort, but also a quiet power, one that allowed her to move through the world in a way she never had before. She was no longer just the poor, unnoticed girl who lived on the outskirts of town. She was someone who had finally been given the chance to shine. Days passed, and Elara's life transformed in ways she hadn't imagined. The shoes continued to bring her good fortune, their magical properties unfolding more with each passing day. As the weeks went by, her newfound confidence and ease became even more pronounced. With each step, she moved further from the humble, solitary existence she had once known, and closer to the world she had always dreamed of, one of comfort, acceptance, and respect. But the deeper Elara sank into her new life, the more she began to feel the weight of her dependence on the shoes. At first, the shoes seemed to give her everything: good fortune, admiration, and wealth. She no longer had to worry about going hungry or enduring the cold nights without warmth. People treated her with kindness and respect, and opportunities seemed to appear out of thin air. But as the magic of the shoes continued to influence her life, Elara began to notice something unsettling. Each time she wore them, she felt lighter, more powerful. Yet, as time passed, a quiet sense of unease began to stir within her. It wasn't the shoes themselves, it was what they represented. Elara had grown accustomed to them, and with that came an uncomfortable truth. She wasn't sure she could live without them. What if the luck runs out? She found herself thinking one evening as she gazed at her reflection in the small mirror by the hearth. The girl who had once been content with simple things was now a person defined by the fortune the shoes brought her. Was she still herself? Or had she become something else? Something that only existed because of the shoes' magic? One afternoon, she found herself walking through the village market once again, but this time there was something different about the way people looked at her. Their admiration, though still present, had shifted. Some looked at her with envy, others with awe, but there was a growing unease in the air, an unspoken awareness that Elara's good fortune was not entirely her own. She felt their eyes following her, measuring her not for who she truly was, but for the luck she carried with her, as though they saw her as an extension of her shoes rather than as herself. It was then that she realized the truth. She was no longer in control. The shoes had begun to control her, subtly shifting her perception of herself and others. What had once been a simple tool for survival had become her crutch, something she leaned on for a sense of identity. The magic that had brought her happiness was also the same magic that was slowly eroding her independence. Her gaze wandered to the bakery stall, where the friendly baker greeted her with his usual smile. But today his smile seemed strained, as if he too was beginning to see her as something different, something she wasn't sure she wanted to be. "Good day, Elara," he said, his voice warm, but there was a hesitance in his tone. Elara smiled back, but the smile felt thin, as though it didn't quite reach her eyes. As she continued down the street, she noticed other villagers whispering behind their hands as she passed. She had grown used to their admiration, but now, for the first time, it felt uncomfortable. It was as if the shoes had made her a spectacle, something for others to marvel at, but nothing more. She wasn't a person to them anymore. She was a symbol of something lucky, something magical, something to envy. She could feel their eyes on her, their gazes weighing her down in a way they never had before. What do I have without the shoes? Elara thought, a wave of panic rising in her chest. Who am I if I lose them? Her heart began to race as the question she had been avoiding for so long bubbled to the surface. She had been so caught up in the allure of her newfound fortune that she hadn't allowed herself to ask the most important question. Was she still herself? The shoes had brought her everything, that is, except the one thing she had needed all along, her own sense of self-worth. The girl who had once walked these streets with nothing but hope and dreams was now someone else entirely. Had she traded her identity for luck? The world felt dizzying around her. The streets seemed longer than they had before, the people's faces more unfamiliar. She began to question every decision she had made in the past few weeks. The shoes had given her everything she had ever wanted, but in doing so, they had also taken something from her: her independence, her ability to navigate the world on her own terms. She could feel the coldness creeping back into her chest. It wasn't the winter's chill, but the fear of being exposed. She knew she needed to make a choice. to embrace the shoes and continue down this path of comfort and dependency, or to let them go and find her own way again, even if it meant facing the uncertainty of life without them. As she wandered through the market, her thoughts swirled with the growing weight of the decision. What if the shoes were the only thing keeping her afloat? What if, without them, she would fall back into the hardships she had worked so hard to escape? Yet, the nagging feeling inside her would not relent. She could not ignore it any longer. The shoes had brought her fortune, but they had also trapped her in a gilded cage. The afternoon sun was beginning to set, and the long shadows of the village stretched out before her, like a reflection of the crossroads she now faced. Elara could feel the pull of the shoes, almost like a tether, holding her in place. She stopped, standing at the edge of the market square, watching the people around her. She had always been a part of this village, part of its pulse, its rhythm. But now it seemed as though she was watching it from the outside, as if she no longer belonged. With a heavy heart, she made her way back to the small cottage, the shoes growing heavier with every step. She needed to decide, but deep down, Elara knew that in order to find true happiness, she would have to take off the shoes and face life without them, to stand on her own 2 feet, without the magic, and rediscover who she really was. The night was settling in, casting the village in a blanket of cool darkness. The stars twinkled above, but the quiet hum of the world around her felt distant to Elara. She'd returned to her small cottage, the shoes still snug on her feet, but now they felt different, heavier, as though their magic had shifted from a source of comfort to a burden she could no longer carry. Elara sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the shoes in front of her. They gleamed softly in the flickering candlelight, their fine leather seeming to mock her uncertainty. The warmth they had once brought her had begun to feel like an illusion. As she thought about the events of the past weeks, how the shoes had granted her wealth, respect, and admiration, she realized something vital. None of it had been earned. Her good fortune hadn't come from her own efforts or abilities. It had come from the shoes, and now, more than ever, Elara could feel a creeping sense of discomfort within her, a sense of hollowness. She walked slowly to the window, the cold evening air brushing against her face as she looked out at the village. She could see the smoke rising from chimneys, the soft glow of lanterns, the quiet bustle of a town that had never been far from her reach. It had always been there, waiting for her to be part of it. But now she felt like an outsider looking in, like a spectacle rather than a true member of the community. The people who had once overlooked her now admired her, but it was not for who she truly was. They admired her because of what she wore, because of the luck that had been bestowed upon her by a pair of enchanted shoes. As the wind whispered through the trees outside, Elara thought about the girl she used to be, the one who had lived simply, who had been content with small joys, with the quiet rhythm of her life. She had been happy then, in her own way. But now everything had changed. The shoes had brought her wealth and attention, but in doing so they had robbed her of something essential, her authenticity. She had become something she wasn't. She had become a symbol, a representation of luck, not of herself. The more she thought about it, the clearer it became. She could no longer live her life depending on the magic of the shoes. It wasn't real. The wealth, the admiration, it was fleeting. If she kept going down this path, she would lose the one thing that truly mattered, her sense of self. Who am I without them? She asked herself, her voice soft and uncertain. What do I have left? The question gnawed at her, but deep within she knew the answer. She had everything she needed already. She had her strength, her resilience, and the ability to make a life for herself without relying on the whims of luck or magic. The shoes had been a tool, a fleeting means to an end, but they were not her salvation. She was her salvation. It was in that moment, as the wind howled softly through the trees and the candlelight flickered in her room, that Elara made her decision. She stood up, walked toward the shoes, and carefully pulled them from her feet. She placed them gently on the floor, staring down at them with a mix of gratitude and resolve. "Thank you," she whispered, "but it's time to walk on my own." The shoes no longer held the same magic for her. They had served their purpose, and now she was ready to face the world without them. The weight of the world, which had once seemed unbearable, no longer felt so heavy. She felt lighter, freer, in a way that she hadn't felt in a long time. The magic wasn't in the shoes, the magic was in her ability to choose her own path, to step forward with courage, no matter what came next. Elara sat back down on the edge of her bed, taking a deep breath. The world outside was quiet now, but she knew it was a new beginning for her. A beginning where she didn't have to depend on any outside force to shape her future. The true magic, she realized, was in her ability to change her own life, to find her own happiness, and to stand tall as who she truly was. The morning light seeped into Elara's small cottage, casting a warm glow on the bare floor where the shoes once lay. The room felt different now, quieter and more peaceful. She had not realized how much the shoes had dominated her life until they were no longer there. Their absence was a quiet liberation, a reminder that she was free to define herself by more than just fortune and external luck. Elara stood by the window, watching the gentle sunlight dance on the snow-covered ground outside. The world seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for her next move. She had faced the truth. The life she had built with the help of the shoes had been hollow. The shoes had given her a taste of happiness, but it was a happiness built on illusion. True happiness, Elara now knew, came from within. It was the ability to embrace the world, not as an extension of some magical gift, but as a person with agency, with choices. Elara stepped outside, her feet bare against the cold ground, and felt the briskness of the morning air fill her lungs. She had often feared the cold, the loneliness of being alone in the world, but now there was a new sense of clarity. Her feet, now firmly planted on the earth, felt grounded. She took in a deep breath and smiled. This was real. This was hers. The cold no longer seemed as harsh, and the vastness of the world no longer felt overwhelming. There was something powerful in being able to walk forward without needing to rely on a crutch. As Elara made her way through the village, the people around her still looked at her with curiosity, but this time she noticed their gazes weren't filled with envy or judgment. Instead, there was a kind of warmth, a recognition of her humanity. She passed the baker's stall again, and this time he smiled at her, but it was different. There was no awe in his eyes, no surprise at her newness. He simply smiled because he saw her for who she was, not for the luck she carried with her. "Good morning, Elara," he called, his voice light, friendly, without the strain of anything unspoken hanging in the air. Elara stopped and nodded, her heart light. "Good morning," she replied, offering a genuine smile, one that reached her eyes. "I'll take some bread, please." As she walked away, she noticed a small child running toward her, laughing and playing in the snow. The child was unburdened by the world, filled with joy in the simple things. Elara watched the child, her heart swelling with a new sense of hope. The simplicity of life, the joy of the present moment, was something she had forgotten in her chase for external validation. "I have everything I need," she whispered to herself, more as a reminder than a statement. It wasn't the shoes that had changed her life. It was the way she had started to see the world. She had spent so long thinking that her happiness was tied to something outside of herself, something magical, something external. But now she understood. Happiness was already within her. Elara spent the rest of the day walking through the village, helping others with their tasks, offering a kind word here and there. People began to greet her with a renewed sense of warmth, seeing her not for her external success, but for the change in the way she carried herself. Her inner strength had begun to shine through, and it was that people admired, not the fleeting magic of the shoes. As evening fell and the village settled into its peaceful rhythm, Elara returned to her cottage. The fire crackled in the hearth, and the warmth of the room felt different now. It wasn't just the heat from the flames. It was the warmth of knowing that she was where she needed to be. She no longer felt the need to seek out validation or luck. The world was no longer a place of scarcity or struggle. It was a place of possibility, and she was ready to embrace it. She sat by the fire, her thoughts quieting, as she looked out the window at the stars beginning to twinkle above. For the first time in a long time, she felt at peace with herself. There were no illusions left to chase, no magical shoes to guide her steps. What remained was something far more meaningful, the knowledge that she could shape her own destiny. In that moment, Elara realized something else. She was enough. She had always been enough. The shoes had simply been a catalyst, a tool that had guided her to the truth, but it was her strength, her resilience, and her ability to change that had led her here. Now, with a heart full of peace, Elara was ready to move forward, not as the girl who had once been dependent on luck, but as a woman who could face life's challenges head-on, with courage and authenticity. The first light of dawn crept softly through the cottage window, casting delicate golden streaks across the wooden floor. Elara awoke to the quiet stillness of the morning, the kind of silence that felt alive with possibility. The faint smell of wood smoke from the nearby village filled the air, mingling with the crisp scent of pine. It was a quiet morning, much like so many others before it, yet it felt different. Today the world felt softer, more inviting, like it was welcoming her into a new chapter of her life. She stretched beneath the covers, a small smile tugging at her lips. The peacefulness of the moment was something she had not known in years. The weight that had once anchored her heart was gone, replaced by a sense of calm she couldn't have imagined just weeks ago. As she lay there, reflecting on the events of the past few days, Elara realized something profound. She had learned to live with herself. Her gaze drifted to the spot by the hearth, where the shoes had once been. That space was now empty, but in a way, it felt more complete than it ever had before. The shoes had given her the chance to see beyond the immediate, to look beyond the surface and realize that everything she needed was already inside her. It was never about the shoes or the wealth they had brought her. It was about learning to trust herself. Elara rose from the bed, the soft creak of the floorboards beneath her feet sounding like a reminder of the simple life she had once known. She walked to the window, her eyes squinting at the bright sunlight streaming through the trees. The village was waking up, the sounds of early morning chatter and the clinking of carts mixing with the bird calls from the trees. There was something beautiful about these small, everyday sounds that she had once overlooked. Today felt different because Elara understood that she no longer needed anything outside of herself to feel complete. She no longer had to rely on luck or fortune. Her happiness no longer depended on the whims of fate. It had always been about the choices she made, the way she carried herself, the way she treated others, the way she faced the world no matter the obstacles. Happiness was not found in the things she owned or the way others viewed her. It was found in the peace of knowing she was enough, just as she was. As she dressed and gathered the few belongings she had, Elara couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude. She had walked a difficult path, but it had led her to this moment of clarity. Her journey had been long, and there had been times when she felt completely lost. But now, with the weight of her former self lifted, she saw the world in a new light. Every moment felt filled with potential, no longer constrained by the limitations she once believed were insurmountable. When she stepped outside, the world seemed brighter, more vibrant than before. The air felt warmer against her skin, and the familiar village, which she had seen 1,000 times, now appeared fresh and full of possibility. She walked through the streets, nodding and smiling at those she passed, but this time she noticed something different. The people who had once barely acknowledged her, the vendors who had never seen her as anything but a poor girl, now looked at her with respect. Not because of the shoes, not because of her newfound wealth, but because she had stepped into the world as herself. She was no longer an image to be admired, but a person to be acknowledged. The baker who had once given her pitying looks as she passed by, greeted her with a broad smile. "Good morning, Elara," he said warmly, his voice no longer filled with uncertainty. "It's a beautiful day, isn't it?" Elara smiled back, her eyes filled with genuine warmth. "It is," she replied softly. "A beautiful day indeed." She continued on her way, each step feeling lighter, freer, as though the weight of her old life was fading with each passing moment. As she walked towards the town square, she found herself reflecting on the people she had once envied, those who had seemed so content with their lives. She had always believed that they were somehow more fortunate, that their happiness was tied to the things they had. But now she saw things differently. The true wealth was in contentment, in the ability to be at peace with oneself, regardless of external circumstances. She had spent so much of her life searching for something outside herself to complete her, but the answer had always been inside her. As she passed the small group of children playing near the fountain, one of them ran up to her, laughing. "Elara, Elara, will you play with us?" the child asked, eyes wide with excitement. Elara paused and looked at the child, her heart swelling with warmth. She could feel the joy in the child's request, the innocence and simplicity of youth, and for the first time in a long time, Elara felt a connection to that child, one that was pure and untarnished by expectations or appearances. She bent down to the child's level, her eyes sparkling with laughter. "Of course," Elara said, taking the child's hand. For a moment they played together in the sunlight, Elara laughing and running freely, as if she were a child again, before the weight of the world had begun to bear down on her. It was in this simple moment that Elara realized something profound. True happiness was not about escaping the world's challenges, but about embracing the joy in the present moment, no matter what the future held. As the day drew to a close, Elara stood at the edge of the village, gazing at the setting sun. The colors of the sky mirrored the peace within her heart. She was no longer bound by her past, by the shoes or the expectations placed on her. She was free, free to live a life of her own making, free to step into the world as her true self. The sun had set behind the hills, casting long shadows over the village. Elara sat at the edge of the quiet town, her feet once again touching the earth. The shoes, now removed and resting beside her, seemed like a distant memory, their magic no longer a part of her world. Her life, however, was richer for the experience. She had found something greater than mere fortune or external success. She had found herself. The evening air was cool but not uncomfortable. The rustling of leaves in the nearby trees created a calming rhythm, a sound that mirrored Elara's thoughts, peaceful and steady, much like the new life she was ready to step into. She could feel the change inside her, a quiet, reassuring strength that had emerged from the depths of her own journey. For so long she had lived in the shadows of others' perceptions. She had sought validation in the eyes of people who didn't truly see her. Now Elara understood the power of self-recognition. It wasn't the way others saw her that mattered, but how she saw herself. She wasn't dependent on magical shoes or fleeting luck to shape her destiny. She was the one who could mold her future, one choice at a time. "This is my beginning," she whispered to herself, a soft smile spreading across her face. The words weren't just a statement, they were a declaration. She had spent her life navigating a world that felt out of her control, a world where external circumstances often determined her worth. But now, she felt as though she could finally take charge of her own path. With newfound clarity, Elara stood up and dusted herself off. The village was quiet now, save for the distant chatter of a few remaining villagers finishing their evening routines. The moon was rising, casting a gentle light over the cobblestone streets. Elara walked slowly toward the town square, each step lighter than the last. The streets, which had once seemed full of judgment and expectations, now felt like a place where she could live freely. As she reached the village center, Elara was greeted by the familiar faces of the townspeople. They no longer looked at her with pity or awe. There was no longer an air of mystique or curiosity. Instead, they saw her as she was, a woman who had gone through hardship and had come out on the other side, stronger and more self-aware. There were smiles, nods of recognition, and quiet greetings. The baker from the market, who had once hesitated to speak to her, now waved as she approached, his face warm with genuine friendliness. "Elara," he called out, his voice carrying the simplicity of an honest exchange. "Would you like some bread?" Elara smiled at him, her heart full. "Yes, please," she replied. The bread was still warm, and as she took the loaf from his hands, she felt a sense of deep connection to the simplicity of the moment. She was not defined by her wealth or appearance anymore. She was defined by her actions, her kindness, and her genuine presence in the world. As she walked through the village, each step seemed to bring her closer to something vital, something whole. The whispers of the past, the ones that had judged her for her poverty and her reliance on external fortune, were fading. The quiet acceptance of the people around her brought a sense of calm to her heart. She realized that her true value had never been about what others thought of her, but how she had learned to accept herself. Elara reached the edge of the village once more, where the landscape stretched out before her, vast and inviting. The world was no longer something to be feared or dominated. It was a place to be explored, a place where she could carve out her own space. "I am not who I was," Elara said softly to herself. The words were both a relief and a promise. She was free now, free from the expectations, the illusions, and the dependencies that had once held her back. She could now be the person she was meant to be, not a person defined by luck, not a person defined by the shoes, but a person who could stand proudly on her own. With each breath, Elara felt a deeper sense of peace settle within her. The path ahead was not easy, it would require effort, and there would be struggles. But for the first time, she was ready to face it. She was ready to live fully, to embrace the challenges, and to shape her destiny with her own hands. As the wind blew gently through the trees, Elara took her first step forward into the unknown. But unlike the uncertain steps she had taken before, these were steps filled with purpose. She was no longer walking towards something outside of herself. She was walking toward her own truth, ready to meet the world as the person she was always meant to be. As the days passed, Elara's transformation became apparent to everyone around her. The village that had once seemed cold and distant now felt like home. Her newfound sense of purpose, grounded in the acceptance of her own identity, had not only changed her, but had begun to ripple outwards, touching the lives of those she interacted with. Where she had once been invisible, now she was a woman of substance, a beacon of quiet strength, a symbol of resilience. The villagers had always admired the illusion of wealth and luck that Elara had once carried with her, but now they admired her for something deeper, her authenticity. They saw her not for the fortune she had briefly gained, but for the woman she had become. Someone who had learned to walk in the world with humility, with courage, and with a heart full of purpose. And it was not just the villagers who saw this change. Even the winds seemed to whisper it. Elara's steps were no longer driven by the desire for external validation. Each day, as she passed through the market square, she was greeted by smiling faces, not because of her fortune, but because of the person she had grown into. She no longer walked with the air of someone who had something to prove. Instead, she walked with the confidence of someone who had nothing left to hide. She was free, and that freedom radiated from her. One afternoon, as Elara walked along the path leading to the forest, she paused to look at the view that had once seemed so distant to her. The sun bathed the landscape in warm hues of gold and amber, the fields stretching out before her in a vast, open canvas. She had always looked at this world with longing, but now, as she stood on the edge of it, she felt no fear. There was nothing left to run from, no need for pretense, no need for luck to carry her. She was ready to embrace life on her own terms. It was during this moment of reflection that Elara made another decision, one that would shape her future. She would no longer live in the shadows of her past, nor would she wait for the next lucky opportunity to come her way. The shoes, with all their magic, had served their purpose. They had led her to the realization that her true power had always been inside her, and now she would choose to live fully and authentically in service of herself and the world around. "I will build my own path," Elara whispered to the winds, her words carried away by the breeze. As she made her way back into the village, she was filled with a quiet sense of conviction. It was time to bring about the change she had longed for, not just in her own life, but in the lives of others as well. Elara now saw that the true wealth in life came not from the things you could hold, but from the things you could give. Your love, your kindness, your genuine care for the world. The shoes had taught her that, and now she was ready to put that lesson into action. Her first step was small, yet it felt monumental. She visited the baker, who was busy at his stall, his face lit up as she approached, his hands momentarily halting their work. "Elara, what a pleasant surprise," he said warmly. Elara smiled, her heart feeling lighter than ever before. "I was wondering if you could teach me how to bake," she asked, her voice steady and calm. "I've always wanted to learn, but I never had the time." Perhaps we could do it together." The baker looked at her, a gleam of recognition in his eyes. "Of course," he replied. "I'd be delighted to teach you." Elara knew that this was just the beginning. The small act of reaching out, of wanting to learn, was her way of giving back to the village that had once seen her only for her luck. It was no longer about standing out or gaining attention. It was about becoming part of something bigger, about contributing, connecting, and growing with those around her. And so Elara spent the coming days learning to bake bread, working side by side with the baker, sharing stories, laughter, and a sense of belonging. She found joy in the simplest of tasks, the kneading of dough, the warm scent of fresh bread filling the air. As she learned, she also began to teach others, sharing her new skills with the villagers who had always supported her, showing them the power of community, of building something together. The transformation Elara had gone through was not just about personal growth. It was about creating a ripple effect. The village itself began to change, not in terms of its wealth or appearance, but in the way the people interacted with one another. There was a new spirit of mutual support, a sense of unity that had not been present before. The people had always relied on luck or circumstances to determine their fate, but now they were learning that their own hands, their own choices, held the true power to shape their lives. As Elara sat at the edge of the village one evening, watching the sun set and the stars begin to twinkle above, she reflected on how far she had come. The shoes were no longer part of her life, but their lesson remained deeply embedded in her heart. True luck, she realized, wasn't about finding magic. It was about finding strength within yourself and using that strength to create the life you wanted, to make a difference in the world around you. "I am enough," she whispered, the words carrying on the evening breeze, and for the first time she truly believed them. The village had slowly transformed under Elara's quiet leadership. The changes were subtle, like the way the seasons shift without anyone noticing, until one day the earth is suddenly warmer, the lights softer. It was not just the bread baking or the conversations shared under the wide sky, though these were significant, but something deeper, something more powerful. The people of the village were beginning to embrace their own strength, to take pride not in the fleeting elements of luck, but in the hard-earned satisfaction that came from self-reliance and community support. Elara had learned this lesson herself, and now she was passing it on, not through speeches or grand gestures, but through her everyday actions. Each morning she would rise early and help the baker, kneading the dough, preparing the bread. The rhythm of the work grounded her, and with each loaf they made, she felt herself growing more connected to her purpose. She had stopped looking for outside validation or approval. Now she lived for the joy of the process, the comfort of hard work, the simplicity of small, meaningful tasks. She no longer needed magic to guide her. The magic was within her, always had been. One afternoon, as she worked in the bakery, the door opened, and a familiar figure entered. It was the village elder, a woman whose age and wisdom had always commanded respect. Her face was lined with the stories of many years, but her eyes still sparkled with curiosity and sharp insight. She had watched Elara's transformation closely, and had seen the quiet shift in the village. "Elara," she said, her voice gentle but firm, "I've been hearing the most wonderful things." Elara paused, wiping her hands on her apron. "Wonderful things?" she asked, unsure of what the elder meant. "Yes," the elder continued, stepping closer. "Your influence is changing the way people look at the world. Your strength, your humility, it's making a difference." Elara smiled, but it was not out of pride. It was a quiet, almost shy smile. She had never sought to be noticed. She had only wanted to live with authenticity. The elder's words, however, filled her with warmth, a quiet acknowledgement that, perhaps, she had already begun to achieve what she never thought possible. "I've been thinking," the elder said, her voice becoming thoughtful. "It's time for you to step forward, not just as a part of the village, but as someone who can guide others. The lessons you've learned are valuable. They are something others need to hear. There is so much power in what you have discovered about yourself." Elara's heart skipped a beat. She had never imagined herself in such a role. "I'm not a teacher," she said hesitantly. "I'm just someone who found the courage to live honestly." The elder smiled warmly. "Exactly. That's why you have something powerful to share. You didn't have to find magic to change your life. You found yourself. That is the true lesson. Elara's thoughts swirled. She had spent so much of her life seeking answers outside herself, looking for some sign or intervention to make her life easier. But now she knew better. It was the simplicity of her journey, the way she had learned to let go of illusions and face the world without pretense, that had allowed her to grow. Her life was full of potential, not because of luck or magic, but because she had learned to embrace her own strength. I think you're right, Elara said after a moment of reflection. I've learned that the only way to change the world is to change myself first. She paused, feeling the weight of her words. I've found the courage to live honestly. Now I can help others do the same. The elder's eyes sparkled with approval. That's the heart of true leadership, Elara. To guide others by showing them the power of their own potential. From that moment on, Elara stepped into a new chapter of her life. She became a leader in her community, not by standing at the forefront, commanding attention, but by embodying the values she had learned: authenticity, humility, and connection. She taught the people around her how to embrace their own power, how to find strength in their struggles, and how to create a life of meaning through self-awareness and personal growth. The changes in the village became more noticeable as time passed. People started working together more, supporting each other, and learning that their worth was not measured by wealth or appearance, but by their ability to give and to grow. The community, once divided by superficial distinctions, now thrived on a deeper, more meaningful connection. A connection that had been seeded by Elara's journey. One evening, as Elara walked through the village after a long day, she paused to look up at the sky. The stars twinkled brightly above, and the familiar sense of peace settled over her. The shoes, the wealth, the fleeting moments of luck, they no longer mattered. What mattered was the life she had built, the love she had found in herself and in the people around her. She no longer needed the external validation she once craved. She had learned that happiness didn't come from luck or magic. It came from the choices she made every day, from the strength she found within herself. The world was hers to shape, and now, more than ever, she was ready to live fully, embracing every new moment with confidence and authenticity. The days drifted into weeks, and Elara's life began to settle into a rhythm she had never imagined for herself. The weight of her past, her reliance on luck, her fleeting dreams of external success, had dissolved into the quiet strength she had built from the ground up. As she spent more time helping others, teaching them what she had learned through her own transformation, she felt a deeper sense of fulfillment than she had ever experienced. The village was changing too. The seeds of community and self-reliance that Elara had planted were taking root, and the once overlooked villagers were now flourishing. The sense of connection between them had grown, and they no longer looked to fleeting moments of good fortune or external sources of validation to define their happiness. Instead, they were building something much more enduring, a shared sense of purpose rooted in their collective. Elara had become the heart of this transformation. It wasn't just that she led them through her words, she led through her actions, through her everyday choices. Whether it was offering help to a struggling farmer, listening to the worries of a child, or simply lending a hand in the fields, Elara's life was a testament to the strength that comes from authenticity and genuine connection. One afternoon, as she walked through the village toward the market, a familiar voice called out to her. It was the baker again, but this time there was a new light in his eyes. Elara, he greeted her with a wide smile. I've been meaning to talk to you. Elara stopped, smiling in return. The baker had become a friend, someone she had shared both quiet moments and laughter with over the past months. What is it? She asked, curious. I've been thinking about what you said the other day, he began, his voice sincere, about how we create our own happiness. I've seen how the people are coming together more now, how the village has changed, and I realized that you were right. It's not the luck we're waiting for, it's the effort we put into each other, into our lives, and I want to help too. I've been thinking about starting a community garden, a place where everyone can grow together, share, and learn from each other. Elara's heart swelled at the thought. She had seen the change in the villagers, but hearing it from someone else filled her with pride. That's a wonderful idea, she said, her voice filled with warmth. A garden where everyone can come together. share their skills and their resources. That's exactly what we need. Let's do it. From that moment on, Elara and the baker worked side by side, bringing the community together to build the garden. People from all walks of life contributed, sharing their knowledge, their seeds, and their labor. As the weeks passed, the garden blossomed. It wasn't just a physical place where food grew. It became a symbol of what they could achieve together. A place of nurturing, where not just plants but relationships could thrive. As the garden flourished, so did the sense of unity in the village. The community came together each day, not just to tend the soil, but to support one another in ways that were as much about the heart as they were about the hands. There was laughter in the air, a sense of connection that had once been missing. It wasn't about the magical shoes or the wealth that had once seemed so important. It was about shared effort, shared joy, and the realization that true success was not in isolation, but in togetherness. One evening, as Elara sat by the garden, watching the sun dip low in the sky, she reflected on how far she had come. The shoes, the fleeting good fortune, they were now distant memories, reminders of a time when she had sought happiness outside of herself. Now she was grounded in the truth that had emerged from her journey. Happiness is not something to be found, it is something to be created. As the village continued to thrive, Elara knew that her own journey was far from over. There would always be challenges, always be moments when she would have to remind herself of the lesson she had learned, but she no longer feared what was ahead. She had learned that life is a journey of small steps, and it was through each step, through every decision to live with authenticity, to act with kindness, and to give with an open heart, that true fulfillment could be found. The village had become her family, and she had become their anchor. She no longer needed external validation to feel whole. She had built a life based on honesty, connection, and purpose, and in doing so had found the strength to shape her own destiny. As Elara looked out over the village one last time, the stars beginning to twinkle in the night sky, she smiled. "I am enough," she whispered to herself. "I've always been enough." The moonlight bathed the village in soft silvery light, and Elara felt at peace. She had come to understand that the most important journey was not the one that led to external success or validation, but the one that led inward, the journey to understanding herself, and in doing so, understanding the world around her. And with that knowledge, she was finally free. As the seasons turned, Elara's life unfolded like the garden she had helped cultivate. Slowly, steadily, and with great care, the village had become a place of warmth, of cooperation, of growth. People no longer came together simply because they had to, but because they wanted to. They had learned to see each other not as strangers, but as partners in life's journey, and Elara, with her quiet leadership, had helped guide them toward this transformation. Elara spent most of her days helping the villagers, teaching them the skills she had acquired. She no longer just worked in the bakery with the baker. She worked with the farmers, the children, the elders. She taught them about the importance of nurturing one another, about how real wealth lay not in gold or riches, but in the connections they forged and the love they shared. And as she passed through the village, Elara felt the bonds between people strengthen, felt them grow. It was a gift she had never expected to give, and one she had never expected to receive in return. But, as much as she had come to love the life she had built, she knew that her journey was not yet complete. There were still mountains to climb, still paths to walk. She could feel it in her heart, a quiet, undeniable pull towards something new, something that called her beyond the village, beyond the life she had come to treasure. It was not a desire to leave behind all that she had created. No, that would never be the case. But Elara had always known that true growth, true fulfillment, came not from staying in one place, but from constantly pushing beyond the limits of what was known, of what was comfortable. One evening, after a long day of work, Elara sat by the fire in her cottage, the soft crackling of the flames filling the silence. Her thoughts drifted to the future, her future. She had built a life she was proud of, one founded on authenticity, strength, and love. But there was a restlessness within her, a feeling that she had yet to explore the full extent of her potential. She could feel the world calling to her, urging her to take another step, to continue her journey. She had learned that happiness was not a destination. It was a journey, one that involved both the joy of the present and the courage to face the unknown. Elara had walked a path towards self-acceptance, but there was still so much of the world left to explore. She thought of the people beyond the village, those who were still trapped in illusions of luck and fortune, those who needed to hear her message, those who still lived in fear of what might happen. There was so much more for her to give. It was then that Elara made a decision, one that had been quietly forming in her heart for some time. She would leave the village, not to escape, but to expand her understanding, to share what she had learned with the world, beyond the small community she had come to cherish. She would travel, see new lands, and bring her message to places where it was needed most. As she sat by the fire, Elara could already feel the pull of the journey, a sense of purpose guiding her forward. She knew it would not be easy, but she also knew that every step she had taken, every lesson she had learned, had prepared her for this. The world was vast, and the possibilities were endless. The next morning, Elara stood before the village, the familiar sights before her, her home, her garden, the faces of the people who had become like family. There was a bittersweet feeling in her heart as she prepared to leave, but she knew it was the right choice. Her journey was not over. She took one last look at the village, inhaling the crisp air, feeling the warmth of the rising sun on her skin. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for helping me become who I am." She turned and walked toward the path that led out of the village, her steps steady and sure. As she walked, she felt the weight of the world shifting, the path before her widening, inviting her into the future. As the village faded behind her, Elara felt a quiet peace within herself. She was ready. The road ahead was uncertain, but it was hers to walk. She was no longer the girl who had been swept along by luck and chance. She was the woman who had chosen to carve her own path, and nothing could take that away from her. The journey would continue, and with each step, Elara would grow, evolve, and embrace the world with the strength and wisdom she had gained. The future was unknown, but for the first time in her life, she was walking toward it with open arms, ready to embrace all it had to offer. The sun hung low in the sky as Elara walked down the winding path, the village shrinking behind her with every step. The cool air of evening brushed against her face, carrying the scents of the earth, of pine, and of the distant river. Each footfall on the path felt like a step toward a new version of herself. Someone who was no longer defined by the past or the illusions of external success, but by the choices she made in the present. The shoes, the fleeting wealth, the dependency on luck, they were all behind her now. Ahead of her was nothing but possibility. Elara had known deep within her that she could never stay in one place forever. Life was meant to be explored, to be lived with an open heart and an open mind. She was no longer waiting for magic to change her fate. The magic had always been within her, in her ability to face the unknown, to confront her fears, and to grow from every experience. She could hear the sound of the river in the distance, its flow steady and calm, like a constant reminder of nature's gentle power. The land was rich with beauty, soft hills, tall trees, and wide open spaces that stretched endlessly before her. It felt as if the road itself was inviting her to explore, to venture into new realms. She had always been afraid of change, of stepping beyond the comfort zone she had built. But now there was no fear. There was only peace and purpose. "I am ready," Elara whispered to the wind. Her voice was soft but resolute, like a vow she had made to herself. "I'm ready to find my own way, not because I have to, but because I want to." As the sky deepened into twilight, she stopped at the edge of a meadow, where the last traces of sunlight illuminated the wildflowers at her feet. She knelt down and gently touched one of the flowers, feeling its soft petals against her skin. The moment was simple, quiet, and yet it felt profound. The world was vast and full of possibility, but in this moment Elara realized something. It wasn't the future that mattered most. It was the journey itself, the act of moving forward with intention, the knowledge that she was choosing her own path. Her journey would not always be easy. There would be challenges, setbacks, and moments of doubt. But Elara understood now that every step she took, whether it was a moment of triumph or of struggle, was a part of the larger story she was creating for herself. She no longer sought external validation or fleeting happiness from luck. She had found her peace in the present. She had found empowerment in the simple act of living authentically. The village, the people, and the life she had built there would always be a part of her. But now she had the freedom to explore the world with new eyes, to learn from it, to shape her destiny with her own hands. The shoes had served their purpose, leading her to this very moment. They had given her the courage to step forward, to discover who she really was. But now she was ready to walk without them, to rely on the strength she had developed within herself. As the moon rose high above the horizon, casting a silver glow over the land, Elara felt a quiet contentment settle in her chest. The journey ahead was hers to create, and though she did not know what the future held, she knew that she was prepared for whatever it might bring. She was ready to embrace whatever came her way. The path stretched out before her, endless and inviting, and for the first time in her life, Elara knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. She had found her true self, and now she was free to live a life that was her own, on her own terms. And with that, Elara took another step, her heart light, her spirit strong, and the world full of endless possibilities. Elara continued her journey, each day flowing seamlessly into the next. With every step she took, she moved further from the doubts of her past, embracing the freedom she had longed for. The world around her was no longer a place to fear, but a canvas to paint her own story. The path ahead seemed endless, yet it wasn't overwhelming. Rather, it felt full of promise, as though the road stretched out just as far as her ambitions and dreams could reach. Along the way, Elara met others, people from all walks of life, with their own stories, their own struggles, and their own dreams. Some of them were lost, just as she had once been, while others were on paths of their own discovery. Elara shared her story with them, not in grand speeches or declarations, but through simple actions, by listening to their stories, by helping when she could, by showing them the same compassion and strength she had learned to show herself. And in return, they shared their wisdom with her, broadening her understanding of the world and deepening her connection to it. She discovered that true fulfillment came not from the destination she reached, but from the people she met along the way. She was no longer seeking something outside herself. She had found her place in the world, and it was here, in every shared conversation, in every moment of kindness, and in every quiet step she took forward. As the days turned into weeks and weeks into months, Elara's confidence continued to grow. She had once been afraid of the unknown, unsure of her place in the vast world, but now she walked through life with an open heart, ready to embrace whatever came her way. There was a peace in her heart, a deep knowing that her journey was just as important as any destination. It was the act of living fully, of accepting the world as it was and seeing the beauty in it all. One evening, as she rested under a large oak tree, the soft sound of crickets singing their nighttime songs around her, Elara closed her eyes and let the world wash over her. She thought about the village, the life she had left behind, and the life she had built from the ground up. She thought about the lessons she had learned, the lessons of courage, resilience, and self-empowerment. She had come to understand that life wasn't about finding a quick fix, a shortcut to happiness. It was about growth, about embracing the process and allowing each experience to shape her into the person she was meant to be. She had once believed that luck, fortune, and external magic were what made life worthwhile. But now Elara knew better. True happiness wasn't something to be found, it was something to be created. It was about choosing to live with authenticity, choosing to stand firm in her own power, choosing to walk through the world with an open heart. And most importantly, she had learned that true wealth was found in connection. Connection to herself, to others, and to the world around her. As the moonlight filtered through the trees above her, Elara felt a deep sense of peace settle within her. The world was still vast, still full of unknowns, but now it felt like an adventure, a journey she was eager to continue. No longer did she feel the weight of uncertainty or the pressure of expectations. Instead, she felt a sense of belonging that came from within. She no longer needed to seek approval from anyone else, because she had already found the most important approval of all, her own. With a soft sigh, Elara stood up, brushing the dirt from her clothes, and looked out at the horizon. It was painted in the colors of the setting sun, hues of gold, pink, and purple blending together in a breathtaking display. The road stretched before her, a path of endless possibilities. There was no fear now, no hesitation, only a quiet sense of excitement. The journey is mine to shape, she thought, a smile curving her lips. She took one final glance at the world around her, at the trees, the rivers, the open sky, and then with a renewed sense of purpose, she began to walk once more. Each step was filled with promise, with hope, with the freedom to continue shaping her life, one choice at a time. And so, Elara walked on, her heart light, her spirit full, knowing that her journey was far from over. She was ready to face whatever came her way, because now she knew that true strength and happiness came from within. The world was hers to explore, and with every step she would continue to create her own story. The path ahead was endless, and she was ready for every moment of it.